You are listening to a Clarkesworld Magazine podcast with your host and narrator, Kate Baker. Greetings, Clarkesworld citizens. I hope this podcast finds you well. We're on to our fourth story for the month of March, issue 198. I hope that you've enjoyed these stories thus far. And as always, thank you for coming back to listen and for your ongoing support. Whether you're telling a friend, you're subscribing via patreon.com/Clarkesworld, or you're a subscriber to the magazine, thank you so much. And if you aren't, please consider doing so. We're going to need your help more than ever as the year progresses. Our story is Beck, Ascendant, and is by Shari Paul. Shari Paul, who can be found at the website sharipaul.com, is a speculative fiction writer from Trinidad and Tobago, the land of oil, music, and carnival. Shari has a BA in literatures in English, but works as a clerk. She has been published in Faya, The Dark, Clarkesworld, and Escape Pod, with reprints in Podcastle and Il Buio. You may find her on Twitter ranting about dramas, music, or anything really, when she's not writing. And if you like what you hear, you can go back to Between 0 and 1. There is infinity. So, my dear listener, I hope you can sit back, relax, and let me tell you a story. Absurdly, Beck's first thought is that this is why Tyrial had called her into his office. Well, to his desk, rather, and made her sit down before uploading the files to her tablet. Her people, who she had spent the last 15 years convinced had been killed when that 7-kilometer asteroid had hit their planet, were alive. All of them, including their boy emperor, he who the gods have sent, survived. Everyone except her family. I cannot begin to understand what you're going through. I do know that this is quite a shock, so I will not ask you to go, but... No, I have to go. Please don't reassign me, she says at once. Tyrial shuffles the papers on his desk with a tentacle, then his speaker crackles to life as he says, You, Acker, and 23 plus 3.15 will take the shuttle tomorrow. Beck turns to him, the protest on her lips. He says, I know they don't like humans, but you can all be professional, can't you? Anyway, the higher-ups settled them on this planet, 15 of your years ago and need an update on their progress from the ground. Your emperor, Utan, he wants to reorganize the government and has called for democratic elections. Everything is arranged. You should arrive in the final days before the vote. Remember, you're just there to observe. Utan. When Beck had last seen him, she had yelled that she was going to prove to him that she could, in fact, carry his sword and defeat him with it. She had seen 7 rain seasons then, too young to truly understand what the sword meant, who he really was, and why her father suddenly decided that she should no longer play with him. No. The last time was 6 seasons after that, when he had accepted her father's resignation of the temple and wished them well in their new lives in the desert. She hadn't realized what had really happened then, either, not until the screams and the swords in the night. Tyrial's words came back to her. Wait, when did they get resettled? Tyrial pauses in the midst of whatever he had been explaining to say, 15 of your seasons ago, but I didn't hear about it until just recently. From the report, it was quite a dramatic affair as well. There was a coup in progress when the Toulousian ship landed, brought the whole thing to a dramatic end. Also a mass poisoning at the royal temple. Thankfully for your emperor, he was in the care of his regent at the time and was therefore safe and able to take charge of the situation again. He's still very popular with the people. They're convinced he's a god now. Beck swallows the words on the tip of her tongue, something unnecessarily dismissive that she isn't quite sure she really feels, and says instead, I'll have the report on this desk in 10 cycles. Tyrial gives her a steady look, eyes slightly narrowed, though the effect is diminished slightly by the clear glass helmet between them, and says, Take care of yourself, Beck. She nods, stands, and leaves to pack. Despite her fears, Beck doesn't dream of blood that night, aboard the jump ship from the Toulousian station, She stays up late reviewing materials, forcing herself to focus on standard procedures and general information, and not wander to the past. She falls asleep in the middle, only to be jerked awake when Acker jumps onto her bunk, knocking her to the floor. "What?" she gasps out and groans when she recognizes him. The huge pachyderm-like humanoid is splayed across her bed like a model on the cover image of a romance scroll. He winks at her, caressing a tusk, and she rolls her eyes and says, "I'll report you for harassment." He scoffs and says, "You could. I hear you know the people we're visiting today. Is there anything I should be concerned about? Perhaps an old flame?" "I was 13 when I left that planet," Beck replies, rolling to her feet. Her bag is by the door. She can have breakfast on the shuttle. Acker makes no move to get off her bed, but instead says, "I thought your people married at 10. "Oh, don't be ridiculous," she snaps. He throws his head back in a hearty laugh and says, "I'll meet you at the shuttle. Oh, and by the way, do you think we should get the android a new suit? What were your people's views on artificial consciousnesses and mechanical beings?" "Oh, just get out," she growls. They had already jumped to the planet, 4th of 6 in a dusty system around an orange star. While Beck slept, the planet takes up the whole viewport, blue and green with wisps and whirls of white clouds, under an artificial ring that the Tellusians installed over every planet they claim, as Beck enters the shuttle. "I've already set the time to local, and we should arrive on the surface in the late evening. It is said that the twin satellites have been named for a pair of goddesses, Beck and Cece, and we should see them rising as we land. A good omen in the local custom," announces 23 plus 3.15. "Your people have done a lot since they arrived. Still, believe the Emperor to have saved them and not the Tellusians. It's not surprising, considering that humans are fantastical creatures, stubbornly refusing to see reason in spite of contradictory evidence, but at least it has some benefit in this case. If the God King wills it, it will happen. He is called He who the gods have sent. He is a god," says Beck, taking her seat, not dignifying his dig. Acker scoffs and asks, "Do you still believe that?" "I almost beat him up when I was 7, but my view of him and theirs was never going to be the same. Please remember to show him actual respect. We are meant to observe, not start a war," says Beck. "Of course," says Acker. "We will observe all protocols." 23 plus 3.15 agrees. The shuttle does land at sunset with the silver twin moon still low over the horizon and the sky above in shades of pink and violet. Beck stands just outside the ship, feeling the wind on her face and the weight of the atmosphere settling over her, and then realizes that she's trying to smell home. But of course, this place doesn't smell like that desert. The sand and the wet manure mixed earth and the mossy river water. There are too many trees now, and while some of the buildings are familiar, built in her people's style, mud brick domes and cubes with reed or fabric doors, there are elements that they didn't have, like the hover rail system and flashing billboards. Acker whistles loudly and says, "Right, let's go see the king." There is a moment after Beck walks into the throne room with the others, and before Utan looks up from his desk, that there is absolute silence. Her mother had been a famous beauty among her people. She liked to joke that many men had wept on her wedding day, and Beck looked exactly like her. The same brown skin and long black hair braided down her back. The same bright, mischievous eyes and pout to her lips. The first person to break the silence actually whispered, "Tari?" That makes Utan look up and his mouth fall open, but Beck is shocked too. Utan, as a boy, had been skinny, small, with a cleft lip, twisted spine, and clubfoot brought on by the infamous breeding of the royals. At some point in the interim, he had grown tall, though he was still slim, and had had the cleft lip closed, but he still looked like a lot like she remembered, and yet not. He had become a man. His voice is deep when he finally manages. "Beck, you're alive." "Beck?" He breaks into a smile and makes to stand. An attendant is quickly at his side, helping him to his feet. Beck freezes, unsure of what to do next. He advances anyway, his smile widening with each step, and he reaches for her, Then suddenly she's in his arms and the weight of him is too much. Beck bursts into tears and cries into his shoulder, and she's embarrassed and confused at her own reaction. But then she feels his own body tremble slightly and realizes that he's crying, too. It's only when he releases her that she notices that he touched her. In another life, more than 15 years ago, her father had warned her that she must never touch the Emperor, not anymore. He was worlds above her in so many ways. Someone clears their throat. Acker, probably, and he says, "Your Imperial Majesty, great ruler of the people of the river, we have come as ambassadors of the Telusian conglomerate to confirm that all is well in your new home. If it pleases your Majesty, we promise to be as discreet as possible." But Utan replies to Beck instead, saying, "How long can you stay? You can stay as long as you like. We have the elections in a few days, but I can find the time to take you wherever you want to go. Beck, you do not know how much I wished that you had made it out as well. I looked for you after the Telusians came, but they told me that your family, that your village was gone. How are you here?" Another person coughs behind him before Beck can respond. Utan does not turn away from her, but Beck freezes again, her blood running cold. Tiri Al had told her the Emperor had been saved by his regent. With a chuckle, Neth says, "I think that's enough. I think that's the end of it today. Perhaps our esteemed guests would like to join us for dinner." Akka replies immediately, "I'm told you have the best wine in 9 worlds. Utan takes Beck's hand again and says, "Come, I will show you the way." Neth laughs and says, "We shall reconvene tomorrow. Well, I won't be here, but you all know what to do. Hopefully I'll be back with you all in a few days." There's a chorus of laughter to this, but it's already fading to nothing behind them as Utan leads the way out of the room and then down the corridors until they enter a cavernous hall where servants are still laying out table settings. They are even dressed the same as in her memories, simple white uniforms, though of a thicker material, with full shoes on their feet instead of sandals. They all stop and turn to the Emperor and bow. "Your Majesty," they say. That finally jerks Beck out of her daze, and she gently but firmly pulls her hand out of his and says, "Wait." He turns to her, gaze full of concern and still wet with tears, and asks, "What is it? What do you need?" Beck has to take a moment to collect herself. She's broken several protocols in the last few minutes alone, but her emotions are all over the place and she can't find the words. He says nothing, waiting, and finally she manages. "Is there?" She can't finish, but he seems to understand because he says, "Come." Then he takes her hand again and leads her out of the room and through the corridors, and then out of the palace altogether, through the back and down the stairs, to an open courtyard where a tower of light shines into the night sky. Beck lets him guide her right up to it until she sees the names of the dead in the light, and then she's crying again, and all she can do is hold on to Utan to keep upright. "Well, that was awkward," says Acker as Beck joins them for breakfast the next morning. Beck groans, face hot, and says, "Promise to be more professional today." "I think you will find that difficult," says 23 plus 3.15. "Why?" asks Beck, tapping out her selections from the menu at the food station. "Because His Majesty is already on his way here. He called ahead to say that he wants to give you a tour of the city." 23 plus 3.15 replies in a slightly mocking tone. "What?" Beck sputters, surprised. Acker laughs and said, "Well, that makes our job much easier. Please try to keep the tears at a minimum so you can get some work done." Beck wants to curse him. Instead, she says, "Please try to remember the tasks at hand. I promised Tiri Al a full report in a week's time." "So you're coming back with us?" asks Acker. "This isn't my home." "That Emperor sure looks like he wants to make it yours," says Acker. "Don't be absurd," says Beck with a scoff. "Where have you been all this time?" asks Utan as he guides their chariot hovercraft away from the shuttle. He had arrived, as Acker said, shortly after Beck's breakfast did, but waited patiently until she finished and even insisted that she bring along a mug of hot root tea. I should be asking you that, says Beck, trying to keep her attention on the city unfolding around them. You're going to see how we've been, says Utan. I want to know what happened to you. There is a surge of anger that leaves a trace of bitterness in her voice that Beck can't hide when she replies. What? Surprised that I escaped? Utan misses it entirely. Yes, they told me everyone had been killed. I had wanted to beg your father to stay, but he insisted, and I had no choice but to accept his retirement. When I found out about the attack, I thought I had let you all go to die. Beck looks across him then, searching his face for what she isn't sure, but all she sees on his expression is sorrow and some regret. She swallows a breath to calm down and says, I would have died if it wasn't for the traitors who found me. Traitors? Asks Utan. Yes, but not who you're thinking of. They said they had decided to come to our planet on a whim and wound up in the desert by chance. They found me in what was left of my house where my father had hidden me. I woke up on their ship so confused. Were they Tellusians too? No, but they were once offered resettlement by the Tellusians. They chose to wander space instead. I don't think they trust the Tellusians. They never said anything, but they weren't really pleased when I told them that I was joining the resettlement group. It's their fault, really. They kept telling me of the amazing things the Tellusians were doing, and I, being the sole survivor of my people, or so I thought anyway, decided it was my duty to help other people like me. And somehow, and possibly, it's brought me here to find you all alive and well. Beck can feel the tears welling in her eyes, but she holds them at bay with a swallow of air and asks, Did you know? Utan glances back at her and asks, What? What did I know? Beck hadn't realized she wanted the answer to his question until the words are out of her mouth. They were going to kill my father? Utan stills for a moment, but then he drops his head and says, No. I suspected, later, that something was going on, but I never had proof. It makes sense that they would. Well, look at me. I was sicker then, always close to death. It was only a matter of time before I actually died. But what if I lingered? It would be smarter to just remove me, and to ensure that, they of course had to get rid of my most trusted guard and all his people. Did you know that they were trying to kill me when the Tellusians came? And Neth saved you? He snorts and says, You make it sound much more heroic than it was. I just happened to be in his house the day of the coup attempt. But if the Tellusians hadn't shown up, it wouldn't have mattered. The rebels had an army and controlled most of the city, and the priests were taking people's lives. My reign was over. They continue in silence for a time after that until Beck realizes they're in the busiest part of the city, near a market, and she can't help but gasp. Then Utan smiles and says, Welcome to my city. I hope you will find it to your liking. Beck can no longer remember what their old city had looked like, but she knows it wasn't anything like this. The new city has been built in the form of a circle on the edge of the second largest continent on their new planet, near the equator. There are tropical trees she doesn't recognize lining the streets, and strange birds sing from their branches. Tiny creatures, some covered in fur, some in scales, some in feathers too, scurry around the people below or float and flutter past them in the streets. The people themselves are not all her own kind. There are more shades to their complexions, colors to their hair and eyes, and the languages they speak are slowly blending into something new, though only the vendors are fluent in the markets. Their clothing is more unfamiliar than the palace. The air on this planet is cooler but humid, so there's more fabric stretching along arms and legs, and the fashions reflect styles from the other new refugees settled in other parts. The imperial palace and temple are still to the north of the city, but there are plazas and parks where the children play throughout, and more business and market districts to the center, with quiet neighborhoods of family compounds all around. Utan explains as they go. I spent most of the journey over, in the early years of the settlement, talking with the Telesians and Neth, discussing how we might make this transition as smooth as possible. The Telesians have quite an extensive library and so many examples of civilizations who have experienced the same things. Do you know that 60% of them fail after resettlement? I don't want that for our people. I feel that it might be inevitable still. All of this, the new ideas, the new procedures, the new government soon, all of this is my hope for our future. Beck considers this. There are flyers and ads all over the city center, advertising this person or that running for some public office or other. There are also several images of Utan, including sculptures. Someone has scrawled across one. Long live he who the gods have sent. Don't you want a more direct hand in that future? Utan smiles wryly and says, I will have it still. Our people consider me a god, but I am just one person. And even with my advisors, did you see them? I insisted on a representative from every level of society I can think of, from professions and interest groups. But even then, I can only do so much. I will remain their emperor, but their new government will be directed by them as much as possible, so that maybe we can be one of the 40% to make it. Beck thinks of the people she had seen in the room only briefly. In another life, that room would only have contained the priests, the military advisors, minor princes, and the occasional private petitioner who was still one of the wealthiest members of their society. She asks, How did you convince them? His smile shifts into a smirk, and he says, I didn't. The threat of the Telesians did. Beck's brow furrows in confusion, and she says before she can catch herself, But the Telesians are strictly non-interventionalists. How? He winks at her, and something flutters in her chest. It is 23 plus 3.15 who makes the connection. It is odd, isn't it? He says in the midst of editing video footage of the city around them. What is? Asks Beck, only half interested, compiling her notes. Acker is doing nothing at all, sprawled on the floor, polishing his tusks. Your emperor's former regent, Neth. He seems like a very pleasant man, helpful, knowledgeable, but also uncommonly shocked to see you again, says 23 plus 3.15. Beck pauses and turns to look at the android. He stands at his workstation doing a maintenance check and his work through the same cable. Everyone was shocked to see me. I was shocked to see them. I thought they were dead. Yes, and anyone would assume whoever didn't make it off the planet with them is dead. But the way he looked at you, I can show you the video here. He cues up the day of their arrival at the Imperial Palace. Beck tries to ignore the sight of her breaking down completely in front of Utan, or the softness of his expression as he holds her, and focuses instead on the man standing behind them. Neth, tall, bald, bronze-skinned, with the golden ink markings of their former life on his face and exposed arms, more than the ones surely covering Utan. Neth is as shocked as she expects him to be. But 23 plus 3.15 is right. There is something more to this expression, not surprise but horror, and just a hint of anger. She takes a breath. Beck had never spent much time with the regent in their old life. He was at first the old emperor's vizier and closest confidant. His time at court was focused on the business of running their empire, managing the treasury, the tributes, and the late emperor himself. When Utan ascended the throne, it was no surprise that Neth became his regent, because who better to advise the new ruler than the person with the most knowledge of their empire? But she had encounters with the man before, and in every single one, he had frightened her. Beck knew that, as a child, she had been willful, defiant, and bold. She went where she shouldn't be. She spoke out of turn. She challenged Utan at every turn as if he were her little brother, though he was at best several weeks her junior. It was something she had never really outgrown, even now at 28 seasons, and a lifetime away from home. Her parents had, at best, half-heartedly reprimanded her when she made a move out of line. After all, they had never intended to remain at court anyway, not after the old emperor's death and the first signs of the new directions Utan seemed to be interested in taking them. But Neth had always treated her as if she were a plague on the court. She had thought, then, that it was because she sometimes made Utan forget himself. He would chase her, bicker with her, try to show her up instead of politely ignoring her misbehavior. In their 12th season, after her father had refused yet another marriage proposal for her, Utan had personally gifted her an estate near the edge of the city. It was a traditional gift to an unmarried woman so that they might have some business to support them. But Neth had treated it almost as a proposal of marriage, and he had stood beside Utan's throne then, staring at her as he did in the video, as if he was watching his own assassin approach with a knife in her hands instead of tears in her eyes. Beck tries to play it off. He's never liked me. He probably thought I was going to make the Emperor do something silly again. I was a very naughty child. Are you sure? Asks Acker, sitting up, staring at the screen. Yes, says Beck, offering him a smile. It's nothing. He never showed my family any kind of trouble. I doubt he ever spoke more than a handful of words to my father, and it was surely to remind him that I had to remember the Emperor was the Emperor and not another friend to play with. Says Acker. Let me show you something. He calls up a screen and starts playing footage from the night before. There had been a banquet at the palace, supposedly to celebrate the upcoming elections, but also for Beck's return. Utan had insisted she attend, and Acker had made sure she was dressed in a fine evening gown that he had found in a store somewhere in the city, and not the uniform she'd planned to wear. It was light green, form-fitting, and long-sleeved with a jade and a shell belt that should have looked nondescript, but somehow made her look as regal as the mother she was starting to forget. Utan had actually left his place on the throne to sit beside her, presumably to catch up, and told everyone to have fun talk amongst themselves while the two friends reconnected. Acker's footage shows this at first, but then switches to news and community feeds, and one thing stands out stark among the many messages posted. Our Empress has come. Beck feels her face burn in embarrassment, and she snaps. What nonsense is this? You've been to how many worlds now? You know how gossip works. Acker snorts at her and says, Before we arrived, and maybe even the first day, all talk was about the upcoming election. Your man, Neth here, had the second highest percentage points in popularity among the other candidates. No one could make up their mind about them, and everyone else had written in the Emperor in the lead. What? Beck sputters despite herself. He said that he was handing over the power to the people. He's naive if he really thinks that will happen, says 23 plus 3.15. Most of your people still want him on the throne, and they're willing to vote him into office to ensure it. Don't be surprised by the vote result in a few days. Okay, but what does that have to do with me and Neth? These videos of you and the Emperor reminiscing have surged him ahead in popularity. Right now, he's going to win by a landslide. A young god emperor who saved them and brought them to this new world where they can start over. Who has been making reforms to get them a better life than their old one while relinquishing power in so many ways. Who may now finally have a queen. Who better to keep your people going forward than him? If you're running against him, you might as well drop out now and save yourself the humiliation. Beck's still reading the post, despite the dismissal. At least one post dangerously reads, She, who the gods have sent, returns. No, Utan isn't in the running. All the votes will go to Neth, she says. Yeah, I mean, officially that's what should happen, but at this point, everyone is going to be looking to the Emperor for everything. Neth's going to end up a puppet. I'm not staying here. My life is with the resettlement group. My family aren't even in the sector of the galaxy right now. Acker yawns loudly, then rolls to lay on his back and says, You can still work for the group on this one planet alone. Your people aren't the only ones settled here even. Our embedded agents provide a wealth of information on the progress of civilizations with their records. There's no reason for you to be traveling the galaxy with us, especially with your minimal lifespans. Beck just stares at him, unsure of what to say. And then 23 plus 3.15 says, "Oh, that's interesting." They both turn to look at him. He pulls up yet another video, though this one appears to be live footage, and says, "Your emperor and his former regent appear to be having a falling out." They're out in the open near the memorial, and Neth is scolding, a finger raised in the air, while Utan stands opposite, arms folded across his chest, chin raised. "Can you hear what they're saying?" asks Acker. "We should..." Beck begins, but 23 plus 3.15 is already playing the audio. "Of the matter is she is no longer one of our people. She is reporting on us to the Tellusians. They might have saved us from a terrible fate, the coup, the planet dying because our benevolent god was dying, but you know this hasn't come without a price." "Are you saying that we should not trust her? Did her reaction that day seem false to you?" Even Beck hadn't expected to break down in front of them, and she's still embarrassed about it. Neth shakes his head slowly and replies, "I am merely suggesting that you exercise some caution in your interactions. You have seen and heard what they're saying." "What's wrong with it? Beck is my oldest friend. It isn't the first time that people believed I would marry her." "Has she told you that she intends to stay?" "She is free to come and go as she pleases. We are her people, and if she wishes, this can be her home. We are her family, too. And besides, I've already said that I will not marry the god emperors. I will not pass on this terrible fate to anyone. Any votes that come to me will go to you. Or is this what you're really worried about?" Neth straightens his spine, scowls, and says, "Of course not. What I'm worried about is that you're going to be hurt. Pep took his family and left us to die. You know what would have happened if the Tellusians hadn't arrived." Beck stands up, ready to go, but doesn't take a step. Acker glances at her from the floor, but 23 plus 3.15 says nothing. She's waiting for something, she realizes, and then Utan says, "She told me her family were attacked. They were dead before anything happened in the capital. It wasn't the Tellusians who saved her." "Right. Some group of space nomadic peoples came down to trade and found her in the ruins. It's a good story, I'll say, but it doesn't change the fact that we don't know what they were doing or where she's been in all this time." At this, Utan puts up a hand and Neth closes his mouth. "Beck is my friend, and I trust her. I would ask you at least to trust me to make the right decisions. After all, aren't I going to put the fate of our people in your hands in one day's time?" Neth has nothing to say to this, and Utan turns and walks away. But when the Emperor is out of sight, the man pounds his closed fists into his thigh and exhales. Beck breathes out as well and says, "I need to go out." Acker raises a hand from the floor, waves, and says, "Don't be out too late. Tomorrow is election day." "I won't," says Beck, already on her way to the door. Utan takes one look at her face when she enters his room in the palace. "So, you do have cameras on us. How much did you hear?" "It was by chance. You were out in the open. We're only observing for a report. Not... Anyway, I told you what happened to my family. Do you think that we had anything to do with the coup?" "That is what Neth thinks." "I asked you what you think." "I believe you," says Utan, meeting her eyes. "You were a child, same as me. Neth is suspicious, as he's always been, but I remember General Pep too, and he wouldn't have betrayed us." "Why does Neth think he would have?" Utan rises, taking her hands in his. "He thought the timing was too close. Your father leaves for barely a quarter season, and suddenly we're under attack? Some of your father's men were involved too. I saw their bodies in the aftermath. So of course he thinks that you were all involved. Beck tries to pull her hands away, but instead Utan pulls her closer and brings their foreheads together. She's forced to speak, staring down at his chest. We were still settling into the village when the attack happened. It was the middle of the night. I remember my father dragging me out of bed and making me hide under the floor of the storage room. They didn't even set it on fire. Lucky for me, but I had no way of escaping. Not until my space nomads showed up. And they only found me because someone had a pet that kept trying to climb into the stores. I believe you. Beck, of everyone, you have always been the person I know would tell me the truth. I wish that I'd been able to help you then. Beck turns her head, and he pulls her fully into his arms, letting her head rest on his shoulder. She doesn't return the hug, but he doesn't pull away. I'm not unhappy in this new life. I'm helping people. I'm seeing worlds that I never even dreamed existed. My father would have loved it. He always thought life at court was too restricting. That's why he left, not because he wanted to betray you, but because he wanted to see the world that only he had heard about from the envoys, or because he met their people in war. I'm sorry he never got to see it, but I can make a record for those just like him who want to see what else is out there but can't. I wouldn't have survived at court, you know that. I wouldn't listen, and fighting with your harem would have killed me. Utan laughs and asks, then you would have married me, eventually? Beck pulls away at once and says, that's not what I meant. Utan just laughs and hugs her again. It's all right. It would have been enough just for you to be around. It's enough right now that I know you're alive. No matter what happens in the future, you will still be my friend, right? Beck can't find the words to answer, so she hugs him instead. Beck had to admit that she hadn't quite believed what 23 plus 3.15 had said about the election until the votes started coming in. Shit, says Acker. They really elected the emperor on write-in votes? His opponent, his own former regent, is actually third, so your new head of state is a woman from the legal department. Beck stands again, and Acker says, don't be out late. We have to leave tomorrow. She hadn't really decided to go until he spoke, and then she's on her way to the door. Utan himself is waiting for her outside the ship, and he greets her with a broad smile. It's over, he says. I'm still the emperor, but everything else is in the people's hands now. I did it. He looks incredulous, though, eyes slightly wide, relief making him look even younger than he is. Beck wants to hug him, but makes herself ask, where's Neth? Oh, I don't know. He left for his campaign office this morning, he replies, waving behind them in the general direction of the city center. Listen, I want to take you somewhere. I've already sent my congratulations to the winner, so no one will miss me for a while. Come, let's go. Beck lets him guide her over to his hover chariot, and then they're flying through the city again, past the cheering crowds and ticker tape and banners. Some people spot them, and the cheers grow louder. Flowers are thrown, their image appears on the screen, and at least one person calls, "Our Empress, who has returned." The embarrassment makes her face hot, but apart from waving here and there, Utan ignores the festivities and keeps them on their path. They fly out of the city, then past the imperial palace and temple to an estate near the sea. There are lights on, welcoming them to land in the front yard. Utan helps her out of the chariot, then leads them both to the house. Oh, says Beck, when she realizes that the place is empty except for a dinner table on which there are candles and the place settings for dinner. Beyond the table, the doors, made of actual wood and glass, have been opened to the backyard. There is a bathing pool there, with lights floating on the water. Music plays from somewhere above. It is simple but beautiful. She looks over at Utan, who asks, "Do you like it?" "What is this place?" she asks instead of replying. "Your new home, if you will have it." "My," she begins, but then looks around again. The house is a lot like her old family home in the capital, but smaller, simpler. There was a kitchen, living space, and doors that probably lead to bedrooms. Utan says, "There's space for you to work as well. The Tellusians insist that we keep in contact, so there would be no trouble for you. Also, we are expecting to open an embassy in the ring later this year." Beck doesn't know what to say. Utan keeps talking. "I don't mean to pressure you. This is just an offer. You would be free to come and go as you need. All I ask is that you keep in contact with us. With me. I thought you were dead, but you're here. You do not know how important it is to me to see you here." Beck glances over at his eyes and has to quickly look away again. Suddenly it's too much. A week ago, she had no idea that any of her people were still alive. Now he's offering her a home. But she has one in the resettlement group with Tyrial, Aker, and 23 plus 3.15. There are others too, including other humans from different worlds in the galaxy who joined the resettlement group when the Tellusians saved them. She has never thought about what her life would be like when she was a child in Utan's court, but she had dreamed of seeing as much of the galaxy as she could with the resettlement group. Being able to help others, to spare them the kind of fate that almost took her own life. She cannot give that up. She takes a breath and turns to him, but before she can speak, something zips between them and shatters a plate in the kitchen. Utan moves quicker than she can, yanking her into him and then rolling them down to the floor behind the kitchen counter. There are more tiny explosions, projectiles, she realizes, tearing up the finish of her new house. Someone is trying to kill them. She looks up at Utan in alarm, but he puts his hand over her mouth and shakes his head. She wriggles one arm free of him and presses the panic button on her uniform sleeve. Moments later, Aker whispers at her ear, "Already tracking you. There's at least 3 individuals around your location advancing slowly. How's the Emperor?" Beck looks over him as best she can, then gives up and starts sliding her hands around his body, checking for wounds. Utan inhales sharply but says nothing. Then she replies quietly, "I don't see any injuries. How fast can you get us out of here? Can you alert the authorities?" There's a pause, and then, "Yeah, about that." Neth steps into the house through the back doors and says, "I'm sorry to do this, Utan, but I've worked too hard to lose everything now." "Damn it," whispers Beck, furious. "I don't think your Emperor was really going to be all right with his region if the Tellusians hadn't showed up," says Aker. The projectile assault stopped with Neth's arrival. Utan stands and takes Beck with him, but annoyingly pushes her behind them. She wants to growl at him. That part of her training with the resettlement group involved extensive martial arts and weapons handling. Instead, she says nothing as he asks Neth, "What have you done?" "I'm taking command again. I'm afraid that I can't allow what has happened today to continue." "You're staging a coup against our newly elected government?" "I'm securing the future of our people. His Imperial Majesty, Utan, he who the gods have sent, is unwell and requires rest. He will remain at home under my watch, with updates being sent to the Tellusians to ensure that all is proceeding smoothly as promised. In the interim, I shall resume my duties as regent and steer us ahead." "You're not going to get away with this." Neth scoffs at her. He steps fully into the room, flanked by several guards. "I don't think you understand what's happening here." "No, I get it," says Beck quickly, stepping around Utan and shaking him off when he tries to stop her. "You staged the coup all those years ago. You were probably the one who ordered my family's death to stop my father from getting in the way of your plans. But the Tellusians got here first, and you had to stop everything. Then, of course, when you got here, you probably were still regent for a while, but things were different. Utan had studied under the Tellusians and was able to put some stuff in place you couldn't do anything about. The election was your next best bet, but well, you lost today, so now you're about to lose power again. You've decided to throw caution into the wind and seize power. Have I missed anything? Neth just stares at her. Anyway, you're not getting away with this because do you think the resettlement group is unaware of this kinds of things people try to do? Why do you think 60% of the resettled civilizations collapse? It's not because they couldn't handle the change, though that is part of it. It's because people like you try to take advantage of the circumstances to seize power. You're just observers. You have no authority to stop me. Yes, but you've taken me prisoner, and that can't happen. Neth straightens, smiles, and says, You're not. There's a rumble as the shuttle flies low over the house. The guards look up and then turn in surprise into a spray of darts that stun them where they stand. They collapse immediately. Beck shoves Utan away, jumps and drop kicks Neth in the chest. The man drops heavily onto his butt. She follows him to the ground, grabbing the scarf around his neck and wrapping it like a noose. Oh, I'm sure you were going to say that you didn't take me prisoner. But I can't let you hurt, Utan. Tyrael looks up at her after he finishes the report. For a moment, there's silence. Beck remains standing, staring at one of the many screens behind him. And then he says, You're not going to be punished for this. Anyone reading this will see that you had a reasonable expectation of danger to yourself, especially given previous circumstances. You can relax. She releases a breath. I did interfere, though. Tyrael tapped a tentacle on the desk and says, Yes, but there were other issues at play, like the fact that the man this Neth had brought with him were all agents of the Emperor. You were perhaps not ever in danger at all. I have to say this Emperor is smart. He wasn't expecting your arrival, had no way of knowing how you would react to the situation, but decided to roll with it, and it worked out better than he imagined. The people calling for you as their new queen was a bonus. I'm not going to be their queen. I can't live that life. Oh, whatever decisions you make in your personal life are none of my concern. But I'm giving you a week off personal time so you can recuperate. I know this fair must be traumatizing. What? Beck sputters, confused. Don't let me see you back on the ship before then. Goodbye, he says, and then switches his attention back to his work. Beck stares at him for a moment more, then sighs, turns, and heads out. Acker is waiting for her in the corridor and hands her a pass. Do you know your people aren't the only folks we have to check up on planetside? So I'll give you a ride. I didn't ask for this. Yeah, but it's happening. We're just trying to help you. Just accept it, okay? Hours later, she walks out of the ship to find Utan waiting for her with a smile on his face. There are guards with him, and Beck realizes that she had seen some of them when they had been touring the city before and standing with Neth in the attack. She had thought they were ordinary citizens, but now realizes that they'd been watching them this whole time. She wants to feel betrayed. Instead, she feels relief that Utan had the sense to not go about unprotected. I'm not staying. I'm not asking you to. I'm just asking you to come back every now and then. She looks around them at the unfamiliar trees and sky, at the twin moons and the artificial ring that connected them to the Tellusians, at the men standing guard and her own ship now pulling away, and says, I can do that. I can do that. Thank you for joining us on yet another Clarkesworld story. We have a few more left for you for the month of March. I do hope you can come back and listen, should you so choose. And until then, my dear listener, I bid you a very fond and hopefully very, 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 very temporary farewell.